starting to come in. We'll give it about 30 seconds and then we'll get into it. If you're joining us, we are talking about not really about how awesome revenue operations is or how awesome sales operations is or any of the really tactical stuff like how you can become a brand new RevOps leader or the world's best CRO or anything like that. That's just not what we're talking about today. We're actually going to be talking about you guys, the individuals that are in revenue and sales operations. We're looking at a lot of data around it. We're looking at the math around it, the economics of it, what that means for your careers in it. So it's not, if you're joining us and you really want that top 10 list of the different ways that you can become, the CRO, we're not going to be the right talk for you. But if you are here to learn about where your own career in revenue and sales operations can go and is likely to go based on just the market forces and the economics and the math behind it, we are absolutely going to be the right spot for you. So my name, I'm the one who's speaking. The voice you're now hearing is Jacob Fakheri of Kita Consulting, and my partner, Madeliene Sumera from Kita, is here as well. And you get to see her on video and not me. But we'll go ahead and dive right into this. So by the data, careers in revenue and sales operations. I think a good place to start with why we even took a look at this to begin with is it was a little selfish why we went into looking at this. We were taking a look at our own careers, seeing, where we had done, sales and revenue operations a couple of places, seeing that, we had some suspicions that, as we're doing these things, there seems to be a real time limit on how long you can do revenue or sales operations at a particular company, right? And the way that we started to think about this, when it was just us individually, it was anecdotal, right? When I met Madeliene and we started talking about it a little bit more in depth, it was, okay, there's a theorem here. There really is something that exists that is unique with revenue and sales operations that is very different from any other role in a company. And we, charted it out and we called it the X problem. And the X problem really has to do with when you are, starting a revenue or sales operations team, it's a lot of effort. Your effort level is way up here. And the value of what you're producing is really low, right? But every single thing that you do that does a change, it's a ton of value, right? I mean, it's more and more value every single time because this is all cumulative, right? But over time, that level of effort is decreasing, and the value of what you're producing is peaking. And it's not, infinitely going up forever. And it's certainly not that classic J thing that we always like to see in growth. It does have a peak to it. And you kind of get to about 3 years out and you're at a lot of diminishing returns in what you're doing in new projects. You're optimizing very, very small percentages, and your level of effort is incredibly low. Anecdotally for us, this was things, we could be working at the start of a job 40, 50 hours a week, and towards the end of the job, I know for me personally, it might be 5 hours a month. And that was something that we heard other people in revenue and sales operations kind of saying. After about 3 years, they might be really working only a few hours a month. So that's why we really wanted to take a look at this topic and really start to understand it a little bit more.
Thank
Madeliene,
you.
I'm going to let you take this one.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. So when we looked at the revenue and sales operation as a career, we were looking at 4 different elements. So we wanted to look at what your single company tenure would look like, because we did have our own assumption of the way our career path was, but we were thinking, you know, are we unique or is this standard across the board? Then we also wanted to look at the internal and external mobility path. How does that look like, you know, throughout your career within an organization and outside of an organization? Then we also wanted to look at the overall function, like what that pivot would look like and what that path is. And then the last thing we wanted to look at, because really over time, you know, sales operations, there's a lot of, you wear a lot of hats, and you have a lot of responsibility, but what does that sort of like growth trajectory and responsibility look like over your career across the board? And if you want to kind of just go to the next slide, Jacob. And I'll just kind of start talking a little bit, Jacob, about the what the data that how we captured the data, and then you can kind of maybe go also into the specifics.
Sure.
But as the methodology, what we did is we pulled about 1,000 LinkedIn profiles for revenue and sales operation professionals across the US and Canada, across multiple industries and verticals. And we also wanted to pull the full range of your job history, because if there were any changes in your overall role across your history, we wanted to capture that. And so we found some really interesting statistics. Jacob, you want to take? Yeah.
So I'm the math nerd, or I am one of the math nerds, and I have a firm belief that if you're going to say something, you better be able to back it up with math. So the first thing that we found when we take a look at, you know, what does a career in revenue and sales operations really look like? First up was tenure, right? What we found was, in general, your tenure at a single company in that role is about 2.5 years. And it varied a little bit if you had a slightly different title. For instance, if strategy was included in your title, it went up a little bit to 2.79 years. If it was strictly RevOps, if there was no mention of sales ops at all, if there was, you know, very, you know, just RevOps, it was 2.2 years. And by the way, this is across analysts, this is across directors. As many of you might know, in the RevOps and sales ops space, there are a lot of one-man teams. So there are a lot of people named director that may not have a lot of teams behind them, right? So this is kind of, you know, over all these 1,000 people or so, the average coming back 2.5 years if you're in RevOps or sales ops. When we think about mobility, your ability to get, you know, a promotion either internally or to leave the company and get a promotion externally, your probability of getting an internal promotion, only, like, I think it was 24.83, something like that. Less than 25% of people were getting internal promotions within the sales ops space, sales and revenue operations, sorry. If you were leaving your company and you were going elsewhere, that went up a little bit, but not a ton. It was like 31.3% if you decided to leave your company, and you could get a promotion or a title promotion by doing that about 32% of the time. Obviously, what we're not capturing here is salary data. People are not including that data on LinkedIn. So, you know, even though the majority of moves are lateral, I would imagine there is some benefit still to making a lateral move if the money still increases. Finally, looking at functional pivots. Function pivots here meaning, what did you come from and what can you go to, right? Unless you just really want to be in sales and revenue operations for the rest of your life, you're coming from somewhere and you're leaving it at some point to go do something else. Pivoting in, very easy. Primarily, interestingly enough, most of the people coming into revenue and sales operations have never touched sales. A lot of them are coming from marketing. A lot of them are coming from FP&A. So finance, accounting, and marketing were the largest functions that people were switching from. And I want to say it was something like 68% of people pivoting into revenue and sales operations had never actually touched sales, which is interesting if you are a sales leader and you're wondering why sometimes, your sales and revenue operations stuff is not working as well as it should. 68% of the time, the people touching it may not know anything about your business. So definitely spend some time, educate them. Pivots outward, 4%. Once people come into the sales and revenue operations space, they love it. They stay, which makes a ton of sense. It's very impactful to a business. It's sort of the light version of a lot of things, like data analytics light, sales light, program management light. Like there's a bunch of light versions, and you kind of get to wear a big hat with a lot of stuff under it. In terms of responsibility, this is where it got interesting. Your level of responsibility, except in some very unique cases, i.e., you are the VP of a team of 200, right? Except in very, very unique cases, your level of responsibility was not actually growing at the same rate as a title change might indicate that it's growing, right? You could have the title of a director and, functionally speaking, be doing the same exact job that you were doing when you had the analyst title on it. Maybe slightly different systems, maybe a little bit wider focus, maybe a little bit heavier on strategic focus, but functionally speaking, it wasn't happening broadly across the 1,000 profiles that we looked at.
So Jacob, so if you had to summarize everything from just that prior slide, you stumbled into sales operation. You're only in an organization for slightly over 2 years. And if you move out, it's completely lateral, and the level of responsibility will be
it's a unique kind of thing. I mean, it can grow, but the data that's coming back is suggesting that it's not growing as much as people would like to think that it's
to be, right?
And so, kind of to that, we, in pulling everybody's job history, we were pulling descriptions. This is in your own words. What we found out, we did a very cool bubble chart with this very cool online tool. And what we found, and I'm going to kind of read these out a little bit just because they are slightly blurry. Obviously, process was number one. This was what a lot of people were focusing on. This was the biggest one by far. Around that, you've got revenue, support, customer, strategy, planning. You're driving a lot of stuff. Right? You have drive here, driving a ton of stuff, lots of stuff in the data, lots of stuff in CRM. And there's a lot of things here, but what's very, very interesting to me is that when you talk to revenue and sales operations people, verbally, they will tell you alignment, alignment, alignment. But when they go back and they're actually saying out loud, in terms of writing down what they did, alignment is not there. I think if I remember right, it's one of these smaller ones, and it's a little blurry in this picture. It's pretty low in terms of how many people are focusing on alignment. And so, this kind of makes sense that the job, it's relatively similar around a lot of the same stuff. These are things that every single company needs. It's not going to change too much from company to company. And it's not necessarily going to, morph. It's not going to morph too much over time. You're always going to need really solid processes. You're always going to need to be focusing on data because that's just where the world is going. Reporting is always going to be a very big thing. Customers are the backbone of the business. They're never going away. So this kind of core focus, it just makes a lot of sense why this isn't changing too much. A couple of things just to note on here. Because of this very, sort of not stagnant focus, but just not changing focus too much. What LinkedIn did similar research into the state of sales operations and whatnot. And what they found was 49% of sales ops professionals feel value just as much as the other professionals in their company, right? And again, that kind of makes a lot of sense because it is a very tight thing. We have this over here. You know, one thing that we have discussed over time is that sales and revenue operations, it's really requiring you to go from macro to micro, back to macro every single day. There's a ton of movement back and forth in that. It can get tiring, but it really doesn't move out of these core areas here. So what does that mean? In the 4 minutes that we've got left, what does this really mean for you as a individual who wants to have a career in revenue and sales operations? Number one, competition is going to be increasing.
Right.
There's not infinite new companies. Revenue and sales operations teams, they can be growing, and they certainly are growing. But at the same time, you have a ton of downward pressure on how much that can really grow. For instance, the tech itself. There's so much things here that are going on to sort of, offload, more onerous tasks within sales and revenue operations, help you come to decisions more quickly, help with automation, all of these things. All of these tech advances are sort of creating more downward pressure on the number of new hires that you actually have to have. So there is a danger of oversupply. If oversupply does happen, you're looking at salary peaks. Salaries in revenue and sales operations have been growing for quite some time. But like with anything, you can't fight economics any more than you can fight physics. And you're going to start to see salary peaks. With all of that, increased competition, salary peaks, all of these different things, you're going to start to see the rise of new delivery models. You're going to start to see, and you can go on LinkedIn now and see new consulting businesses and new operations as a service businesses. All these things are out there, and they're all growing. And that's going to be mainly because it allows for a concentration of experience and a concentration of efficiencies that are very difficult for individuals within the revenue and sales operations space to really compete with that.
And but I think also, and I'm just going to dive into this one. The only reason why there's also a rise in concentrations also of consultants is that even kind of more legacy companies are finding that they have to switch over their operations, right, to make it more to align it with the competitiveness of the market. And so the talent that they have in-house is really not enough.
Yeah. And coupling that to the X problem, it's a lot of decisions by companies say, do we want to bring people on if we're just going to lose them in a year or two, or if there's not going to be a lot of work there? They're starting to see that a lot of this is more project-based work rather than build, monitor, maintain over a long period of time. There's just not that same growth path within sales operations. The last big thing that you're also going to see is standardization and transformation. Right. You have organizations out there like the Global Sales Operations Association, SOPSA.org, if you've never been, really doing this inevitable wave of global best practices, standards, certifications, all of these things that are going on. But if you do, in the last minute here, if you do, despite all of these things, really want to continue in the sales operations, revenue operations space, and you're looking at that and going, where can I focus? If I want to have a conversation with my manager tomorrow about where it is that I want to start going, really, it's going to be go-to-market planning and strategic planning. These are things that are very difficult to offload to consultants. Number one, they both require a lot of senior level experience. You have to have been in the company for a while. You have to have been, in different parts of the company or different parts of an organization to really understand how these things all work together. But you also hold a lot of accountability in these roles, and accountability is just not something that consulting firms historically have been able to take on, right? They get paid for the job and they're out the door. So holding accountability outside of the organization, very difficult to do unless you start to look at performance obligation contracts and all these other things that are going on. So if you are still wanting, to grow your career in revenue and sales operations, these are the two areas that you really should think about growing your skill set. They're very hard to automate. There are tools coming out there, but it's a big thinking process that you're going to have to continue with.
Yeah. No, this is not something you want to, and this is the kind of thing that you want to have a conversation with a future hiring manager, because this is something that you want to roll out from the beginning. And we're done.
Yeah, I think we are ending this, guys. So thank you very much. We are Jacob and Madeliene from Kita. Thank you for coming to our talk. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.